Won't dry off, keeps flowing.
Won't dry off, keeps flowing. Won't dry off, keeps flowing. Won't dry off, keeps flowing.
Hello and welcome to my Close It again. And today's examples are going to illustrate how Mr. Krzyżanowski chooses to test modality, or your ability to use modal verbs and modal forms. So the most important thing to remember is that the modality that Mr. Krzyżanowski likes to test most often is the modality of speculation. So how to use verbs like may, might and could. Most Polish students of English think that these can be used interchangeably in most situations, but it's not always the case, and I will discuss it in details soon enough. First, take a look at an example taken out of this year's latest test. And while you're pondering over which forms to use, I'll just point out another important thing about how modality is tested in Olympics papers. So in test G, very often you're required to use modality with one of the verbs in brackets, and the instructions to that task always inform you about the fact that sometimes you might require to use some modality, but a lot of students just ignore the instructions or forget about that fact. When you're able to look at that string of sentences as a certain logical whole, you will notice that we are talking about possibility in a couple of cases here. So the truth is, I can see no player who could beat Simona Halep today. Perhaps with better luck, Serena could have stolen a set from her in the finals at Wimbledon last July, but Simona was better and she won the match anyway. So, I can see no player who could beat, as in who would be able to beat her. Perhaps with better luck, Serena could have stolen a set or might have stolen a set from her in the finals at Wimbledon last July. And that brings us nicely to the thing that I've mentioned before. May is not really possible here. Why not? Because may, might and could are only used interchangeably when we are talking about unverified possibility, meaning we don't really know whether that happened or not. While here, what we're dealing with is a situation in which we already know it never happened. So may is out of the equation, right? Out of the question here. We could only say could have stolen or might have stolen. Take a look at this one now. The prospects are not bad for the coming years. If only the economy would heat up a little bit, which experts are predicting or predict might occur yet this year, we could hope for some real growth. So what you should notice, or should have noticed, is that in the last two gaps, some modality of speculation is required. So may, might, could, should be an option with each of those, really. I cannot really understand why could is not given in the answer key, but if Mr. Krzyżanowski's 100 testów z gramatyki angielskiej book is anything to go by, it's an acceptable answer. Another thing I'm going to comment on is if only the economy would heat up a little bit. When is if only and I wish used with would? Mainly when you're talking about some situations about the present or the future, indeed, that you have very little influence on. So I wish you would give up smoking, if only it would stop raining, and so on and so forth. I have used that example before, I know, but to illustrate a different problem. Now think about modality. And once you've read the whole fragment, you might realize how important the last sentence is. A lot of people would ignore it at their own peril, because there's nothing to fill in here, so why should it matter? Well, it does. The eagle caught on film over Blue Lake might have been the female ringed in Dakota 2 years ago. Several rangers spotted her the same day, but of course we can't be sure. We can't be sure, so we haven't verified that claim or that possibility. Therefore, may, might, and could are all possible or are all acceptable forms here. Well, a different modality for a change. So, what a shame we didn't purge David from the team after his first drinking binge. The manager thinks David should have been purged from the team after his first binge, or ought to have been purged. So, a modality of criticism. And it's possible Mrs. Lee's insomnia is caused by the drugs she's taking. So again, speculation and possibility, but this time round, may has already been given before the gap. So we are dealing with something tricky here, aren't we? Yeah, we are. It's one of those examples which showcase how Mr. Krzyżanowski chooses to test not only your knowledge of English grammar and, well, generally of the English language, but also how much of a logical person you are. Well, it's possible, but then again, maybe not. So Mrs. Lee's insomnia may or may not be caused by the drugs she's taking. And this alternative here is the only thing that matters, and not that many students see it coming. Myślę, że czas spędzony na omawianiu reguł był czasem zmarnowanym, który można było lepiej zużytkować, na przykład poznając więcej faktów. So I think the time spent on discussing the rules was time wasted that could have been better spent, for example, learning more facts. Could have been better spent, says the key, or might have been better spent, meaning these two forms are interchangeably or acceptable, let's say, or I mean both acceptable when it comes to situations that never happened. The time wasn't spent in this kind of way, after all. Mogli być ostrzeżeni, bo byli silnie uzbrojeni, co nigdy przedtem nie miało miejsca. They may, might, or could have been warned as they were heavily armed, which had never been the case before. So this time we're still not sure whether that happened or not, and with unverified situations, may, might, and could are as good. I mean, each of them is as good as the others. And two final examples are to showcase some other modality that Mr. Krzyżanowski likes to test, or a very peculiar piece of knowledge that is actually part of like everyday English. The mistake that Polish students make here, or tend to make here, is not the kind of mistake that a native speaker would ever make. So szczęśliwym zbiegiem okoliczności mogliśmy porozmawiać z przewodniczącym przed zebraniem, co pomogło uniknąć nieporozumienia. So, by a lucky coincidence, we were able to talk to the chairman before the meeting, which helped to avoid a misunderstanding. Yeah, we were able to talk to the chairman. Not we could talk to the chairman. It's what we had a chance to do. Like, we could generally talk to the chairman, would mean, and would be a correct way to say that that was something we were allowed to do or able to do on a regular basis. And in this kind of context, it's fine. But when we are talking about a specific situation, like here, only be able to, or manage, or some similar replacement forms, like succeeded in, talking to the chairman, are an option. And if you take a look at the last example, which is meant to be easy because it's only multiple choice, a multiple choice type of task, once you know what you've already heard me say, by accident he left his laptop on, so I was able to look at the pictures he had been downloading recently. Really frightening indeed. And I think you'll agree that the answer becomes apparent. So, yeah, this one is also about a specific situation. So could is out of the way, could have looked, or could look is out of the way. Could have looked would imply that that never happened and I didn't have a look, while that last sentence, really frightening indeed, suggests that I did. So there are no other options available that are viable or make sense here. Okay, so just to sum up before we go, the most important thing to remember is that in test G, more often than not, you'll be required to know that a modality should be used in some examples. And you have to keep on looking at those sentences provided, or strings of sentences, until you've found a logical way of joining or combining the meanings in all those sentences, or finding a way of interpreting them that will make collective sense. Also, another thing to remember is that modality of speculation is what's typically at stake, and there is a difference between may, might, and could at the end of the day. All three can be used when you're talking about something that you are still not sure about. You don't know whether it's happened or whether it's going to happen. And when we're talking about past possibilities that never came true, there was a possibility that they could have happened, but they never did, then only could and might could be used, while may is out of the equation. Okay. And yeah, I hope I haven't bored you to death today. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you again soon.